there's this idea of a 10x developer. And when I first started in the software industry, I assumed that it meant someone that was 10 times more effective than the next person. And through working in software now for almost 15 years, I've realized that this persona, this person, just does not exist. And typically when someone's talking about the 10x developer, they just mean that someone that can come onto a team and uplift the effectiveness and the efficiency of that entire team through the processes that they introduce, through the way they work with other team members, through the way they communicate. So today I want to go through the 3 biggest things that I've noticed that these 10x developers bring to teams. And if you want to start to implement some of these processes yourself, so you can start to be a real key player and a real effective team member, regardless of the kind of software that you're working on. It could be on small or even massive teams. But typically, for most software teams, they all tend to operate in the same kind of way. We discuss and plan out tickets of work, so we can plan out the next few weeks of work for the entire team to work on. And then we distribute those tickets amongst the team. And then individual developers will start taking those tickets, working on the problems and the solutions, and then adding and contributing to the piece of software that we're working on. There's certain ways that you can follow this. One is that you can get the ticket and implement exactly what was written down on that ticket and nothing else. The trouble is, if you do this, then code bases have a tendency to fall into disorder. It's kind of like entropy for code bases. And every time you contribute to a code base and implement new features and new patterns, complexity tends to increase and disorder tends to increase as well. So unless you're constantly pushing back on this tech debt, or what we can call code rot, everything will just tend towards chaos and tend towards disorder. The only way to fight back on this is that every time you get tickets, rather than just doing exactly what was specified on the ticket, for every area of the code base you touch, constantly try and refactor and constantly try and improve every part of that code base as well. This means that the code base doesn't tend to disorder, and it means that the velocity or the speed that the entire team can work on different areas of the code base remains high and remains really efficient. And the biggest way to do this is just to constantly refactor every area of the code base that you touch. So if you notice something isn't quite following the correct pattern, or if something's a bit of a mess, just improve that part of the code base, just change it, just refactor it, and make sure that you're constantly maintaining the same high standards that you'd expect from yourself. So it doesn't matter if another developer has gone and done something the incorrect way and you didn't spot it in peer review, but it does mean that if you do go to that area of the code base and you do see those problems, don't just ignore them. Work on your feature, but also refactor that piece that you see and constantly resolve all of these problems. If you work this way, then other developers on the team are going to want to maintain these same high standards. There's a concept called the broken window fallacy, which is if a window in an apartment building becomes broken, it's way more likely that other damage is going to occur in that same apartment building versus one that was pristine to start out with. The same is true for code bases as well. If developers come to an area of the code base and it's just a mess, they're more likely to contribute to that mess. So we have to be sort of like gardeners, constantly tending to the code base and pushing back on that tech debt and that code rot that is completely inevitable, and it's always going to be there, but you always have to fight back against it. The second one as well is to introduce patterns, tools and processes to make everything more efficient. So it could be that you're constantly re-implementing the same kind of components. So you build reusable components that another developer can just pop in and implement a certain process really quickly. It could be creating UI libraries. Maybe a certain part of the code base is really difficult to debug, so you make it more easier to debug. You implement remote debugging patterns. Maybe you build tools that didn't exist before to make developing certain parts of the application easier. Boilerplate generators, for example. Maybe it's maintaining documentation or implementing repeatable patterns that make everything more cohesive and easier to work with in general. This just improves developer experience for everyone. The opposite of this is that everyone just kind of goes Wild West and works on any area of the code base as they please. No one follows patterns. Everything is inconsistent, and developer experience just plummets. Everything's hard to work on. There's no consistency. The code is pure spaghetti. It's impossible to debug. It's impossible to test. If you've worked on older software projects or you've just worked in software for a long time, you definitely would have come across these kind of code bases, and they're just horrible to work on. Even implementing features that on your solo projects could take an hour or two, could take days or even weeks on these old archaic systems. And this is because the code base wasn't tended to. No one was pushing back on the tech debt. And since all code bases tend towards disorder, if you don't push back against this kind of stuff, this mess is just inevitable. Now, the third point is so simple, but people tend to miss it a lot, and I'm not really sure why. But it's just communicating. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but a lot of the times people will get tickets and they'll just work on them in isolation, submit the result, and maybe the designer has created something in a really complicated way that was super hard to implement. So rather than spending 2 hours on a feature, you've gone and spent 10, 15 hours, rather than just talking to that designer and explaining why that was hard to implement and then coming up with different designs and a different solution. Or maybe something is just really difficult to implement because of how the current system is architected. If you come across these kind of problems, the best thing to do is just push back against the team, explain why something is really hard to implement. Don't be the kind of person that just says everything's impossible. When you say something's impossible, you don't mean it's literally impossible. You just mean it's not an effective use of time, because maybe you're just trying to solve a really small problem, and in actual fact, that's going to take 100 hours to implement. So when that happens, people just say, oh, that's not possible. But it is possible, it's just not time efficient. So, if you really want to be this 10x developer and doing things 10 times faster, you could even do things 100 times faster if you just don't do the work at all. So that just means communicating effectively and talking through problems. That means that the entire team is educated on how the current system works. So if new problems come up in the future, the whole team knows where we're at and knows what's possible and knows what's not possible. So we can just work more efficiently and more cohesively together because we've spoken through these problems. The total opposite of this is a developer that just does exactly what's on the ticket. They never refactor, they never implement new processes or new patterns, and they don't communicate and only work in isolation. I'm sure you've come across these kind of developers, and they can be really hard to work with because it's difficult to trust how long something's going to take if they say 2 hours, and maybe because a ticket wasn't quite spec'd out correctly, it ends up taking 15 hours and the scope of the project explodes. I'm not saying efficiency and effectiveness is the absolute end goal for everything. When I'm talking about this kind of 10x developer, I'm not saying that they're working longer hours or putting in more work. I'm just saying they're being more effective with the same 8-hour working day. So if you want to start to implement these kind of processes and improve the efficiency of an entire team, then refactor every part of the code base you touch and constantly push back against tech debt. Implement tools, patterns, and processes to make the entire team more effective, and communicate and push back against ideas that are not time efficient. But this is just my take on what a 10x developer is after working in software for almost 15 years now. If you like these kind of opinion piece videos and want to see more like it, please let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.